Jennifer McClendon had always known her daughter would leave the nest. She remembered thinking that the first time she'd held Hannah in her arms, shortly after being born. Boys were boys, and she loved Levi and Eli, but still. A son is a son till he gets a wife. A daughter's a daughter for all of her life. She'd held her daughter in her arms and extended her pinky finger. Her eyes not even open, Hannah had gripped it in one tiny hand. Zachariah had stood by, and she'd felt such love for him then, as he minded the boys. But that moment was for her. Her and her daughter. She'd known this day would come, but that had been such a different world. A world before the Shulvanti. Before invasions and Imperiums, when the biggest problems were making payments over at the co-op, and how the weather would be for planting. It had been a time of innocence. A smaller world of PTA meetings and maybe going to the state fair. A time of farmers' almanacs and helping out at church after service, before the world turned upside down. People had found a new normal after a while, and there were PTA meetings and church socials again, and she still knew this day would come. She shared a bond with her daughter that would never be severed, even when Hannah left the nest. She just hadn't imagined her baby girl would fly quite so far. Hannah had come to breakfast and brought a guest. The Pezrin, past, was a surprise. He clearly knew the girl with Tom Warwick. The two had greeted each other at the entrance, then spent the next few minutes so studiously avoiding each other that you couldn't miss the connection. Everyone bustled inside as Berdine and Brelak took coats and pushed away her offers to help. Zachariah had gone over to help Levi with the grandkids. She shot a look over at Eli, and he took the hint to lend a hand. There had been introductions all around, while Berdine hustled the Pelavons and the kids inside. Breakfast was still hot, and the crowd mostly settled at the big table, while others spread out in the living room. Hannah certainly picked her moment. Mum, Dad? I don't know exactly how to tell you this, but I got a job. Jennifer knew she hesitated, but one look at her daughter's face was all she'd needed. This was the day. The rest would be details. Hannah looked as happy as could be, but her smile held a little hint of, I'm thrilled but worried. Whatever it was, it had her excited. Jennifer did the practical thing. Let's sit down first, then you can tell me all about it. Of course, Brelak and his wives were interested, but the adults held back. The girls naturally wanted to know everything at once. Hannah took the hint, thank goodness. While it still felt awkward now and then, there were times when it felt like she had to wear her husband's hat. Sometimes it was meeting with a new family that had settled. Not a human one, though the town had picked up a lot over the last few years. So there were those too. But whatever it was, there were times when she was the matriarch. It wasn't as if she'd ever felt like she took a back seat to Zachariah, but there was an expectation that she was in charge. Families new to Earth needed time to understand Earth normal, and every so often she just had to fill the role. It usually wasn't overt, but it was still there often enough that she'd gotten comfortable with it. And it was there now. The Desaris would be curious, but the women of the family were letting her take the lead. The matriarch was going to speak with her daughter, and while they'd listen in, they stay out of it. That didn't mean the chatter from the girls wasn't handy. You are going to work with her past? Zinchiki, the Petron girl, asked, looking from him to Hannah. That was what was said. What Jennifer heard was, is this a live grenade past? Pa shook his head. No, but we met, and I was offered the chance to come along this morning. I hoped you'd be here. The boy didn't shuffle, but his tail got an awkward kink at the end. While Jen didn't know what that might mean, what she heard was, no, dear. Couples talk never stopped. The little signals you sent one another just got more complicated with time. Little in-jokes and signals that only you knew, or sometimes shared with close friends. With young or new couples, though, it stood out like a sore thumb. The older you got, the easier it was to read. With new and young couples, it was hard not to smile. And those two are definitely a couple. Zinchiki batted her eyes at past, and his tail flickered once or twice before she looked away. The other Pelavon girls, well, Desi Pelavon and her friend Melondi, looked to one another. Melondi bit her lip while Desi said, "So you're going to work at data analysis," Hannah said, nodding her head quickly before looking back. "It's a great job, Mum, but I'm only here for training. I'll be back on Earth before you know it." "That's fine, honey, but your father and I want all the details," Jennifer nodded. "This is a very big step." "We all want to hear," Phrysis chimed in. "But we do need to get going. The winter market will be jammed if we're late." "She's right," Akatai says solemnly, glancing Jennifer's way. "It's wonderful, but we want to get there before it's too crowded for the little ones." That was the other thing she'd learned. Shrivanti wires stuck together like glue. At least in good families they did, and after the wedding, Jennifer had become one of the family. If she told Hannah they'd talk about it later, then Phrysis, Akatai, and the others were going to back her on it. They'd ask, but later. "Mrs. Dasari, I want to thank you for inviting me along," Melondi spoke up. "I'm very sorry, but I won't be able to join you tonight or tomorrow evening. I've got sort of an assignment and my family is pulling me away." She sent an apologetic wince Vadim's way. "I'm sorry." "It's all right," Vadim said, his voice and smile understanding. "Responsibilities come first." "Don't worry," Solana leaned in. "I'll take good care of him." What Jennifer heard was, "I'm planting my flag," and the other Dasari women didn't say a word. Even Badin didn't say a word, though he dabbed a napkin over his mouth for a while. As for Melondi, if she hadn't been looking, she was sure she'd have missed it. Human girls before the shill would have gotten catty. After the Shrivanti, even human girls were starting to come out fighting. Shrivanti girls, definitely. Melondi canted her head. "That's very considerate of you, Solana." And if her eyes had narrowed just a tiny bit? "Oh, she's good. If looks could kill, Solana, you will be singing with the choir eternal." "An assignment?" Hannah asked brightly, looking between the girls and Mr. Warwick. "I know your school is out, but I'd love to help if I can. I'm kind of jealous about your academy." "I'm sorry." Melondi hedged a moment. "It's sort of involved. I appreciate the offer, but it's one of those things that would take more time to explain than to do. I'm hoping Desi and I can sort it out so we can rejoin you as fast as possible. I do appreciate the offer." "Oh, one of those?" Hannah nodded. "Trust me, I get it. I still hope you can show me around your campus, if you have time later." "I'd love to, Hannah," Melondi said, smiling past Zinchiki at Hannah. Zinchiki had already joined past in what looked like competitive eating. "It sounds like fun," Desi nodded, then grinned at the Pelavons. "Maybe on Niosis Day? After my father's wedding?" Jennifer gasped. "That's right. Congratulations." The two Pelavon women smiled, while their future co-wife beamed. If Jennifer had thought Miara was built like a truck, Solani was built like a semi. Prosthetics aside, she was very definitely all women. Not just buff, but sculpted, and Miara had voiced some thoughts on just what kind of Marine she was. Still, what did it matter? Tom Warwick looked happy about it all, though he looked ready to blush. "I know it's your vacation, but I'm very glad you can join us." "Obliged for the invite," Zachariah said. "It's a pretty special day." Jennifer glanced over at her husband and smiled. He sipped his tea, though the cup might have been toasting her just a bit, and his eyes twinkled. Phrysis had opted to give up their visit to the Portico of Empresses, which sounded interesting, but would probably bore their youngest. They were excited about the trip to the zoo, while Frances wanted to show off Shulvanti culture. Even she had to admit the zoo sounded more fun. "Is going to be a traditional Shulvanti wedding?" Jennifer asked. "Exactly," Warwick said with feeling. "I had no idea our whole academy was going to show up to the first one. This is just going to be a small affair." "I hope we won't be intruding," she asked. "Not at all." Mevere shook her head. "We could have hundreds of guests, and it would seem intimate compared to our wedding. You're more than welcome." That did sound nice, and cultural. A traditional Shulvanti wedding would be something to see, without wading through another crowded exhibition that wore out Josh, Cassie, and Lagos. "We appreciate it very much," Melody offered, while Rihanna beamed. "We do," Levi nodded, before setting his plate aside. He picked up Josh and nodded toward the living room. "Hey, Dad, can I talk to you for a minute?" The Shulvanti all smiled politely. It was men's stuff. "Levi McClendon, what is on your mind?" As a personal secretary, you had to be sensitive to the needs of your patron. For Perrin Loreen, that meant charming his way through endless appointments, but also being on top of the comings and goings of his Duchess's affairs, and managing her time. So when a cancellation came up on her agenda, it was proper to know why. After all, it was Ifrovi. There was little enough work being done, so for someone to cancel on his Duchess, it was only right to know why, as she'd certainly ask. That meant a call to Peli Kefrine. If Ganya Sasano was rescheduling their meeting, her secretary could easily clarify matters. It was only a few minutes of flattery, but it worked like a charm. Peli really was a dear. Getting on in years, but he'd make sure to spend some time with her when they did go out to the academy. After all, secretaries had to stick together. Still, keeping your patron in the know, that was invaluable. A Trafalgar's Day wedding for the human, Thomas Warwick? At the Academy Temple? Why, of course the Duchess would understand. Perrin gushed over the happy event and said that the Duchess would be entirely understanding. Of course, the last time it had been the event of the season, and the only thing worse than being talked about was not being talked about. "Your ladyship?" Perrin smiled as he let himself in with the morning tea. "I've just heard the most interesting news." Zachariah settled on the pancakes and coffee. There was fruit on offer, but he couldn't tell what most of it was. Some of it was blue, and he kept his distance from the plover. After moving through the line, he nodded to Levi, and together they settled in away from the crowd on the far side of the living room. "What's up, Bud? Everything okay over at the other house?" Zechariah knew his sons, and poker wasn't exactly Levi's game. "Is Eli?" "It's not Eli. Well, not exactly, but no." Levi took a sip of his drink, then leaned in. "Dad, have you noticed anything weird?" "Son, I've been stuffed in the disco suit and taken to the biggest nightclub in the galaxy, and our host keeps suggesting I might like having my nails painted." Zachariah glanced over to where Badin was cozied up with Jennifer and Brelak, talking about wedding cakes. "Not meaning to poke holes, but you're gonna have to be a bit more specific." "Oh yeah, but that's normal weird. I mean, something's weird. Levi looked perturbed, and Zach waited while he gathered his thoughts. "We went out to a club last night before going to watch that game at the stadium, right? I ran into some interior women, and she didn't want to take no for an answer. Are you alright? What happened?" Zach glanced over at Frances, though she didn't have much local pull. At least Levi wasn't in a cell somewhere. "Were you going to get paid a social call?" "That's the thing." Levi shook his head. "One minute they were all over me, and the next, someone walked up, had a word, and she just walked away." "Maybe they got a call." Zachariah chewed that over while looking at his juice suspiciously. It smelled like apple, but apple wasn't blue. I expect with the holiday they must have a lot of work going on. Levi shook his head. That wasn't a bigger fish to fry kind of exit. Mr. Warwick's girls acted like nothing happened, but Ree was surprised, and Melondi looked shocked. I thought I'd ask her about it later, but she was trying hard to pretend it didn't happen. Levi shook his head. There's other stuff, too. You remember how upset they were at the palace? Gotta say, it sure didn't seem like the standard tour, but I thought Frances pulled some kind of ace from her sleeve. Zachariah mulled it over. The woman they'd run into had taken them into areas where the general public didn't go. Now you mention it, Warwick's girls seemed a bit perturbed. After we saw that bedroom, Levi nodded. Shovanti put a lot of stock in the Imperial family, but granted, the whole obligate your husband in the bedroom thing took your mum and me by surprise. Zach thought back on the day. The Imperial Palace had been a sight to see, but then, folks that lived near stuff usually take it for granted. Tom's girls had been pretty put off, especially Melondi. Poor thing hadn't said 2 words together the rest of the day, and she'd been very upset the other night, too. When Eli went and ate that foot sandwich the other night, you said he brought up the Empress. And her husband, yes. Could be something to that. Eli had a hell of a way of putting his foot in it. Shame about ending the night early, though that might not be the only reason. Levi followed his glance over Solana's way. Badin had a big open kitchen that led to a dining pit and what passed for a living room. Even Shovanti-sized, it was big enough for a parking lot. For Solana and Melondi, it didn't look big enough for the 2 of them. You notice how Solana keeps trying to eat Melondi's lunch? Yeah, and she ain't done with it either. They look like 2 tomcats locked in the garden shed. Levi nodded over toward where the gaggle of academy girls were gathered. They all seemed to defer to her. I mean, like a lot. I heard Melody and Ree talking to Hannah. She needs to talk to you, you know. I know, bud. She's almost out of the chow line, so let's wander back. Zachariah gathered up his tray, but held back a bit. Son, I expect you're right that something's off, but if it kept you out of trouble, it ain't doing any harm. Levi picked up his tray, and they started to stroll back across the room. What are you going to say to Hannah? It's her life to live, bud. Course I'll worry, but I can ask Tom to have a look now and then. Besides, Badin is almost like family. Zachariah felt his eyebrows kind of knit together. Badin was currently draping Mr. Warwick in his suggestions for proper wedding attire. There you are, Zachariah. This will look fabulous on you. Well, practically. Kinda. Zachariah gave Jennifer a look as Hannah headed their way, trailed by the big dark cat fellow. He and Warwick's girl weren't what he'd expected, but that wasn't the matter to hand. Eli, Melody, and Ree had gathered around Jen as they arrived. The look on Hannah's face told the whole story. You look proud as punch. Zachariah smiled at his daughter. Your mum and I were curious how it went. It shows that much? Hannah's cheeks coloured as she tried to hide her smile. I'm really excited. His wife wrapped an arm around his waist. Your father and I were talking it over, and we want to know all the details. Will we need to send you some things to get you started? Not much. It's all expenses paid, and I already have most of my clothes. Well, all my best ones. Hannah looked at him and Jen, and there was still some worry. Maybe you could send some stuff later, though. Course, honey. We're always here for you. Zachariah gave Hannah a grin. In a way, she was just sort of following in his footsteps. Not with the farm, but more the way he had with Frances. Things just happened along the way, but they worked out too. His little girl was all grown up, though a word with Tom Warwick might be prudent. And you're working with Mr. Past here? He nodded at the Pezran. Names mattered, and who knew? Some might move into town any time. Eli snickered. Yeah, she's going to be a data consultant. Past's talons passed within an inch of Eli's face as he reached for the pancakes. Yeah! Eli's grin went a bit sickly. Data consultant. Congrats, Hannah. Pris glanced at her omnipad when it chimed. It was Belder, and she swiped open the connection. She'd been expecting a call sooner or later. She stared at the text in front of her while they chatted. Belle would be coming in off the range tomorrow, and was wondering when she'd come back to the ranch. The casual small talk broke Pris's heart, not being able to tell Belle what was going on, or even how she even knew about the action against her family. I want you back for the dance, at least. You know, party, Ifrovi celebrations and all that, Belder said. So this thing you're working on is difficult? It's kind of awful, yes. I'm sorry, but it got laid on me out of nowhere. Just make sure you get something to eat, alright? I know you. All you do is pick when you're studying. You sound like my father. I wouldn't know, but I could ask you putting on weight if you want. Pris could imagine Belle's grin. It was a good smile. What would her family do? What would she have left to come back to after graduation? There probably wouldn't be a lot of those smiles in the next few years. What's a good partner for, anyway? Seriously, I wanted to talk to you about the dust dance, but if you're working, I can call you tomorrow when I get back. That's alright. If there's one thing I can do is read and carry on a conversation at the same time. Pris tried not to sound miserable. If it had only been something as simple as paying money. Liam had pulled in more than enough credits from the filing against Richet Publishing, but that wasn't enough. It was convincing the government not to expand the original filing for the Navy. That was the real problem. Reputations. The Navy was on the move and no one wanted to stand in the way. The expansion plans had to be stopped, or someone would find a way. Yeah, I know. I still don't know how you can do that, but if you're sure, I'll do my best. Pris tried to keep her tone light, but it felt like a lie. So how's the Turox drive going? Same old, same old. I love being out on the range. Well, maybe not love, but my family's been ranching on Willis from the first settlement, you know? We only started with 1,000 head and portable trailer, but that was still a lot for one of the founding families, Belle said proudly. Pris imagined she could hear the muffled sound of Turox in the background. Just grind through whatever it is and get back here in time for the dance? I'm grinding, Pris paused. Wait, what did you say? About the dance? Well, it's kind of... No, right before that. About the Turox drive? I was just saying it's nice, knowing I'm pretty much following my mother's footsteps. You know, riding the same trails and watching everythings. We were part of the first families, here since Willis was settled. Pris swiped back a few pages, then a couple more. The words were right there on the screen in front of her. That's it? She scanned the words a second time. Oh, sweet goddess! That's it! The Legal Codex for the System of Willis, Volume 1. It was right there at the end of the second chapter. The Rights and Covenants of the Founding Families. Subsection 8 spelled it out. An action of eminent domain against a founding entity must justify both purpose, wherein the government justifies adequate but not excessive actions for the use of the action, and necessity, wherein the government shall not attempt to acquire more assets, property or holdings than necessary to satisfy actions. It was there. It was right there on the page. Pris would never have found the answer in Imperial law at all. It had been hiding there inside the bylaws of the Colonial Charter. Which still wouldn't stop the foreclosure from going through if the balance wasn't paid. Belle, I need you to trust me. Get home, grab Liam, and bring yourselves into town tomorrow. What? Pris, I'm going to barely be able to walk and... Before the end of business, Belle, this is an emergency, Pris nearly shouted. You both need to be here tomorrow. All she had to do was file a motion. That, and If they could convince Liam to pay off the balance, he could afford it. Surely he'd do it for Belder. Kangshri. The old Grinshaw hadn't known what she was doing. Or had she? Tom pecked his way through the text message, hating it. It would be so much easier just to dictate the thing, but it needed to be taken care of, and for some reason, Monsignor Barcio just responded better to texts and voicemails. The priest was hard to get on a call, though given the delegation was there to learn about Shulvanti religion as much as they were on Shill to speak of their own, the priests were probably out and about poking their way through the solstice holiday, like miners panning for gold. It wasn't that the priests were self-absorbed. It was a holy week. Barcio was probably just plain busy. He could call later. Tom wanted to make sure the Monsignor was at his wedding, and it seemed just as sensible to let Barcio invite who he wanted. At least, sending him the text got it out there. It wasn't a conversation he wanted to have with his family around, as they drove back to Fray Sister Sari's tour de jour. Thankfully, the woman didn't have human stamina, and he could spare a minute for the wedding. Just a nice, simple, not naked wedding. Shulvanti style. Of course, some things would take getting used to. The girls were going with Solani to get their gowns. The ceremonial dress for a Drafos Day wedding reminded him of something for a Disney princess. It could be worse. He spared a thought for his warden's uniform. Why scarves? Why couldn't it have just been something cool like armor? Alright, so it's not naked like Shamantal's Day, but one of those gold breastplates? He was carping, and he knew it. It wasn't like Solani could just appear out of nowhere and marry him in Des Head Formal. It would raise far too many questions. And besides, Lani seemed keen on a gown, provided he wore the warden's uniform. Miv had smiled indulgently. Shalea had strangled off laughter. She'd hid it well, but it was not a cough. There had to be a place in the universe where someone could dress up like a Morris dancer and not look like an idiot, but Tom suspected it would not be him 2 days from now. It wasn't that it was a bad look, it was just a bad look on him. He'd tried bargaining for his Air Force tux. Lani had crossed her arms. They were big arms. They were arms that made a statement. Biceps were involved. Pecs came in for emphasis. It mattered to Solani, and it was her special day. He sensed he could have pushed the matter and won, but his heart wasn't in it. As a widowed man, his marriage to Miv and Leia had been his second and third wives. Lani would be his fourth. Or his third wedding. Something like that. It didn't matter. It was important to her, and he was willing to give. At least, with a small wedding, there wouldn't be a lot of pictures. The key to life is not getting through it without looking ridiculous. His inner Taoist reminded him. It's just not minding so much when it happens. It was easier advice to preach than to practice, but he'd do it. After all, Solani had to suffer through getting a tattoo. Shulvanti weddings tended to be all-day events. The actual ceremony was short and to the point, but the preparations? God, the preparations! Bodin kept insisting he get a facial. In a way, he was probably dodging a bullet by going with a uniform. Any uniform. The idea of going clothes shopping with Bodin? He'd do it someday, but not now. The idea of going through that in front of Zachariah and his boys? Zach McClendon was a good soul, and Levi seemed like a copy of his father. But that would be daring the men not to laugh. Eli McClendon would never manage it, and punching him in the nose as a blood sacrifice seemed like a long shot. And there were good sides to the whole thing. During Nifrovi, even the Academy priestess, a woman called a binder, was hard-pressed for time. Instead of all day, the whole affair would be 8 hours, including the dinner. The temple was huge, and they'd probably feel swamped by the emptiness, but it would still be important. Lani's pod was being allowed to come out of hiding for the ceremony. Miv was going to talk to Jama about the reception. The academy was on vacation, and it was a temple, not an amphitheatre packed with students and faculty. It would be fine. The break room in the dorm was empty, and Desi was walking easily now, aside from the occasional twitch or jerk. The exercise was good for her, and Melondi settled down opposite Desi. "Alone at last," she breathed. Desi canted her head ever so slightly. "No, I do not want to think about Solana Dasari. Just let me finish these messages, and we can get started. This speech isn't going to memorize itself. I just need to send this message to Minister Raylan and ask what happened to those agents last night." "Seriously, how does anyone get anything done without a personal spy network?" Desi deadpanned for a moment, arching one eyebrow. Melondi gave her beloved friend the fingers and got on with it. "And I need to ask Wickhama if she can come to the wedding. Well, and ask her about escorts for the priests. That many men all alone is not decent." "I didn't say a word," Desi said mildly, though a second eyebrow shot up, matching the first. "Anything else, or can we get started?" She wanted to meet with Minister Raylan about those agents, when there was time. Right now, the world could ask for anything but time. "We can, but we still need to see Professor Jimenez later." "About time," Desi nodded. After closing down the call to Monsignor Barcillo, Wickhama considered the matter. A wedding on Dreffel's Day would be good for Calera, after the pressure of the address the day before. And it would be good to see Santino. If the priests were going, well, that many men ought to have an escort for decency's sake, and preferably two. Whatever else, at least she could keep the Pelavon wedding from becoming a spectacle. It was only another 120 guests. She could find 80 women who were sober, sound, and respectable. The human delegation was an important cultural exchange. Circulating a quiet notice should be sufficient, so long as it spelled out that the humans were, well, chaste. Surely there were 80 women of reasonable sensibility and character to act as escorts. They simply needed to be discreet. This was practically work. As executive manager of the Tide Pool, Arada Caldries had very few people below Duchess on his direct dial list. Jama Jimenez was one of them, and he swiped open the call. "Arada?" Arada settled back in his chair. "Jama, to what do I owe the pleasure?" Well, I have a catering event for you." "Another one? Jama, that wedding and the Northern Palace affair brought in over 50 marriage proposals." "Approving any, are ya?" "3, he admitted. "Better than average, then." Arada couldn't argue the point. Marriage proposals were 50 a day at the Tide Pool, though the ones worth approval, either for wealth, position, status, or in some cases true love, were honed down to those with real advantages. 3 in 2 events was uncommonly good, but then the painter event had been a platinum mine. "So, clue me in. What is it this time?" Well, as to that, it's another human wedding. My friend Warwick is getting married again." "The Professor?" "Aye, in the Academy Temple on Dreffel's Day." "You want our boys and girls in a temple?" Arada had to pause, just when you thought you'd seen it all. "That will be novel. Who's the lucky woman?" "A death's head. Nice girl, though even for a human he'll be in for a wee climb. She's a big lass." "A death's head? One of her death's heads?" "Aye, and there should be more as guests. Poor lasses locked away in the bunkers for mums and all." "So the Professor in the temple with a death's head?" The Professor was close to the Princess. Close to the Princess meant opportunity. Arada remembered Warwick's Pedrin ward and made a note to bring past. "All right. What are the particulars?" "Admittance at noon, wedding at 4, with dinner and social till 8. "Short wedding, then?" Aye, but most of the guests will be baronesses and above.
They will?
I'm handing the invitations.
I should have known.
I'll rather jot it down to bring the good alcohol for the bar. One did not fish in expensive waters with cheap bait.
They will. Why only most?
Well, there are going to be about 80 secretaries.
Arada stifled a groan. Jama, you know what secretaries are like once you get a drink or two in them.
They're from the Imperial Palace.
Jama let the words linger.
Imperial secretaries generally started around Dame, always ended their careers as nobles of some rank, and from beginning to end they could be invaluable sources of information. He jotted down a note to bring a lot of alcohol.
Secretaries. Got it. Anything else?
Aye. The groom will be wearing a warden's uniform, so maybe dress the boys for a theme.
A warden's uniform? The one with the ribbons? Arada made a note. Those are very popular with the bondage crowd.
He's wearing a real one, but I figured you'd have them to hand, Jama said firmly. It has to be tasteful, you can. His first wife, Miv, is a bonny lass, and she'll murder me if it's nae tasteful.
Arada made a note. No handcuffs.
Burdine will want a hand with the catering.
Burdine?
Do we know any others?
Arada rubbed his forehead. Jama made it sound so easy. Most men at the Typal managed it once, but between the two of them, Jama and Burdine had held the most eligible bachelor prize at the Typal for 9 years. He made a note to bring the lead Chippendale and the Helcom who did the contortionist act. Right, I'll tell everyone to wear nice shoes.
There's 2 parties of humans.
He's bringing in his family?
No, but Burdine has a human family visiting.
Call Hannah, Arada muttered, as he made another note.
Jama cocked his head. Who's Hannah?
Our new asset. She's with the family.
Well, and don't you just move fast then?
Arada preened slightly. That was praise from a master. Can you believe 3 men and only 3 wives? One isn't even married at all. Regardless, we can cover 800 easily. You said 2 parties of humans?
Nay, including the binder. The secretaries will be escorting 40 priests.
Priests? Not priestesses?
It's a human thing. I gather there's a lass or 2, but only one of the women is coming. The rest are all men.
Priests? Really? Anything in particular we ought to know?
Aye, there's one fellow of something called Asatru. He'll probably want a dozen Valkyrie.
Arada ran the word around in his head, then wrote it down after drawing a blank. What's a Valkyrie?
Warrior women. Big shiny breastplates. Battle axes. That sort of thing.
Really? Our girls will enjoy a chance to attend.
Arada made a note to raid the dominance rooms for primitive weapons.
Hell's Day was over, and the guards and the security teams didn't get out much. So, a dozen Valkyries. Is that enough for 40 priests?
Aye, well, only the Asatru lad is into that sort of thing. I'm told the rest are virgins.
Jama, you want to dangle 40 virginal men in front of 800 horny nobles, commandos, and bureaucrats? Arada rubbed his forehead. That's not a wedding, that's a human sacrifice. Commaudry settled herself behind her desk, her expression composed. Why, but you have it? I nearly think I do, your highness. Tarvi bowed. Commaudry imagined it had all the grace of a Turok settling, though she'd never actually beheld such a thing. It was graceless, yet one had to acknowledge the effort. Still. How nearly? One does or does not. She allowed the slightest trace of ire to creep into her voice. Goddess, but how one missed Kadira. These chambers, her office, had always been her private sanctum, where she could vent her innermost feelings. Kadira Zariva hadn't been some minion, but a partner. How
One could even say a friend if one allowed oneself such things. A flare of distemper whirled within her, but she tamped it back into place. Having a plan made that easier, after the distress at returning to Shill only to find her home violated and Zariva gone.
Nearly, in that it's in my pocket, as you will now see.
Tavi wobbled in place, and Camordri gestured peremptorily for her to rise before she capsized. Tavi wobbled upright and drew a vial and a packet from her pocket, producing them with agreeably minimal ostentation before setting them on her desk. Camordri clasped her hands under her chin and steepled her forefingers regarding them. Mint. One knew of the substance, naturally. How one would have to be an utter dullard not to know of it. Certainly it was popular with certain women, and one could easily understand its value in an esoteric sort of fashion. One did love to throw a party, after all. Mother always disdained them, invariably retreating into some back room with a bottle and some trusted cronies. It made a statement, and from a certain point of view it preserved a sense of mystique around her presence. Scarcity added worth, did it not? And yet... The ability to entertain was a mark of grace. To know one's guests was also to put them at their ease, and people at ease were apt to say things that were to one's advantage to hear. She knew that many found her company difficult. How, but one knew the answer. Not everyone had the knack of being liked, and while it would be nice to hold general esteem, it was not something one had a felicity with. One could entertain, and by maintaining a genteel distance with one's guests, one could thus be viewed fondly. It was something that one reserved with the proper members of society, but Mother had always made certain her children knew how things worked. She simply didn't always practice as she preached. As Empress, she had that luxury. One knew of mint. However, it was dangerous. The narcotic was not said to be addictive, but as a means to an end. Well, but that was for lesser women. One could afford to be esoteric in one's manner, to set a style all one's own, but one could never show oneself outside of the most personal of company. That had been Zariva for so many years, and... Camordri clamped down on the thought, and the ire that came with it. Dealing with that would come later, but now...
I was able to get both versions, Your Highness.
Tavi spoke anxiously.
It's, well, some women of the court I know, well, they indulge. Why? Well, they do.
Camordri ignored that Tavi had spoken without leave, pondering the drug. The mint sat on her desk, and she regarded it balefully. It had been difficult not to have Tavi banished after oversupplying her with drink. One had been distracted by the pressure of the moment, and now? Well, but it was a mistake, and that could be rectified by time. But obscuring the matter of her address would speed one's recovery. And for that?
It's best if it's given directly, but the liquid version has a strong smell,
Tavi said, and Camordri breathed silent thanks for a useful piece of information at last.
That's why I got the herbal form. It doesn't smell quite as strong, and you can mask it with something more aromatic.
How? You say that it can be disguised?
But I have done so. That is, I nearly think I have done so.
Well, but you have done so! Camordri cut her off with a gesture. One cultivated one's style, and it was gratifying to see it acknowledged. Still, were there not matters more pressing? And you will see that it is added to her meal, she said. A statement rather than a question, though one drew the words out for their proper impact.
I have access. But one has access.
Tavi's head bobbled.
As my duties for public affairs, I can be in the stadium kitchens during the event. It's customary to look things over, and I'll only need a moment to sprinkle it in.
That much a minion of Tavi's caliber certainly could do, and the woman's merits were adequate within a given scope. It was customary to dine immediately before the address, so one was fortified before a long evening in the public view. Kalira would do so in her dressing room, so there would be the means for delivery. There was no doubt that Tavi was entirely suited to the task. The effect of being incapacitated, of Kalira being overwhelmed in a haze of drug-addled lust, it would be an unspeakable blemish that would be covered up, and people did whisper. The effect would be insidious. How? But one would have to step in when Kalira failed in her duties to appear. The only thing worse would be if it took place on stage, but either way, she would be quite incapacitated. Stepping forward would save the day arc, and one's reputation.
One wishes to know that one appreciates the magnitude of one's gesture, Camordri said earnestly, dignifying Tavi by addressing her as a personage.
It was subtle flattery, but there was a time and a place for such things. After all, Tavi would have to die. A loose end like Tavi? One could not abide such a thing. But as a prior agent of the Interior, the discovery of the venomous specimen who had plied her with drink, then gone even further and drugged one's younger sister? An agent provocateur acting within the bureaucracy of the palaces? Why? But one had little choice but to conduct a personal investigation, driven by the desire to clear one's name. Of course, once confronted, Tavi would act rashly. Violent consequences would ensue. A knife seemed suitable. One would cut oneself with a knife, then place the blade in the hands of Tavi's corpse. One would not simply save the day arc, but also be showered with redemption, the champion of one's family.
I only wish to serve, Your Highness. That is, how, but I wish to serve you, Your Highness.
And has one not said you shall? Is one not an Imperial princess?
Camordri favoured the woman with a smile.
The House of Tasu always keeps its promises.